If you've ever sat down to write your college essay and just, stared at the blinking cursor for 30 minutes, wondering how you're supposed to sum up your entire identity in 650 words without sounding like every other high-achieving teenager out there, you're not alone. Most students dive into college essays thinking it's about recapping their achievements or proving they're passionate or telling a nice, heartfelt story that shows they're more than their grades. And while those things might be true, they're not what moves the needle at places like Harvard, Stanford, or MIT. What actually sets those essays apart isn't just the content itself, it's the structure. If you were to ask any admissions officer what they kind of get bored at when they're reading out college essays, is the fact that the syntax and formatting of the essays look all the same, because it's how the story is told. So in this video, I'm gonna walk you through the hidden framework we use with our private clients, the same ones who've gone to Caltech, UPenn, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, you name it. And it's called a narrative architecture. And once you understand it, you'll never look at college essays the same way again. Now, I know narrative architecture sounds like one of those things consultants say to justify a big invoice, but the truth is I'm just giving it out for free. You're watching this video right now, and this single concept has taken good writers and turned them into standout applicants. We've worked with students whose original essays were technically solid, but after we rebuilt them using this structure, they suddenly felt layered, intentional, and emotionally real. Admissions officers start remembering that, and I'm not just saying this. One of our clients got reached out by the director of the physics department at Caltech to get on an interview to somehow convince him to commit to Caltech. He chose Stanford, but that goes to show how important this architectural structure is. So yeah, it works. It works really damn well. And today, you're gonna get it for free. Now, the biggest hurdle that a lot of students have to go through, even if they were a good writer in high school, is the fact that when you're in high school, right, the things you talk about or the things you write about, in this case, is either someone or something. Right? Never about yourself. So that transition from talking about other people and other things is quite difficult because the end goal of your college essays is to essentially sell yourself. And some students feel a little awkward about that. And because most students just write essays the way they've written English papers their whole entire life, chronologically, safely, they just start with their childhood, move through a few pivotal moments, sprinkle in a challenge, and then wrap it up with some sort of lesson, right? But the result of that feels more like a timeline than a transformation. And let me tell you, if I can predict what the rest of your essay looks like after just 3 to 4 sentences, I can guarantee you that essay isn't that good. Right? Because if I can predict what that's going to look like, it's not going to be so fun to read and it's going to be boring. And what colleges are actually looking for is someone who can take a real, often messy experience and shape it into something coherent and meaningful. They want to see not just what you've done, but how you've made sense of what you've done. And that's where most students fall short. And I don't blame them, right? They have the pieces, but they just don't know how to assemble them into something that actually lands. So the big fat elephant in the room is, how do you build that kind of essay? We use a framework called narrative architecture. It's not a formula, but it's more of a guideline, a blueprint, a way of structuring your story so that it feels intentional, emotionally real, and intellectually alive. And we break it into 3 parts. First is the hook, which draws us into the moment. Second, the turn, where you shift or change, and finally, the reflection, where you pull it all together. Now, just from that, it might sound like a typical essay, so let me just explain myself by going through each one. But before I do that, let me just make something really, really clear with you. It's not about being dramatic or overemphasizing things. It's about being clear. So like I said, let's take our time and go through each part properly. Let's start at the top. The hook, not just detention, but invitation. The hook is your opening scene, but more than that, it's your handshake, right? It's the moment where you say to the reader, hey, come walk with me for a few minutes. There's something I want to show you. And if that invitation doesn't feel intriguing, specific, or alive, the reader is gone before the second paragraph even loads. But this doesn't mean you need some sort of life-threatening, dramatic, tear-jerking moment or a cinematic one-liner. It just needs to feel personal and in motion. Think of it like the opening shot of a film, right? You're not starting with the credits or a block of text explaining the theme. You're starting in the middle of a scene with light and sound and movement already happening. You're trusting the audience to catch up. A great hook usually drops us into a moment, a real and sensory moment. Maybe you're sitting at a lunch table when a friend says something that cracks your view of yourself. Maybe you're holding your breath behind a curtain before a performance, knees shaking, or maybe you're even just watching your younger brother try and fail for the 5th time to pronounce a word. And something clicks in your brain about communication and connection, right? What matters is that we're with you. not hearing about it in retrospect like a lecture, but living it through your eyes. And most importantly, what I mean is your perspective. So the litmus test for a hook like this is if someone reads your first 2 sentences, would they have to keep reading to understand what's going on? If the answer is yes, you're in good shape. The turn, where the story stops being what happened and starts becoming who you are. Now, this is the engine. It's where your essay moves from observation to transformation, right? This is the turn, right? So when I say turn, I don't mean a plot twist or a big dramatic failure. I mean the inflection point, that moment where your perspective starts to slowly shift. And sometimes it can be subtle. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, like a slow realization that the thing you saw was strength was actually fear, or that the goal you were chasing wasn't really yours in the first place. The turn is often where the reader starts to understand that this story isn't just about what you did, it's about what it actually meant. It's not about the science fair trophy or the state championship, it's about what those experiences revealed about your values, your instincts, and your blind spots. And this is where a lot of students just try to protect themselves, right? Try to make them so polished to a point where they have no flaws, right? Because they talk about their growth, but not their doubt. They mention change, but never what triggered it. But real narrative architecture asks for more, way more. It asks you to sit in the moment where you weren't sure what to do, where you made a call and it cost you something, or where you didn't act and that silence haunted you more than any mistake could have. The turn is where the stakes deepen, not because you're trying to impress someone, but because you're willing to be seen. And that's the turning point every great essay has. It's the moment where the writer stops reporting and starts revealing. Now, you might feel embarrassed with the things that you say or the things that you do, but let me be clear, one of the most successful students in our programs, some of their essays, I would look at it and feel a little bit of a cringe, but he was just being himself. Right? He's being true and authentic to himself. And I could see that cohesion all throughout his supplemental essays, even including his Common App. Now, I know those AP exams are an absolute pain, so I want to show you this new platform called Stellar Learning. It's a completely free platform with no hooks attached that lets you generate unlimited practice questions for pretty much every AP exam out there, plus AIME, AMC 8, 10, 12, BMT, Harvard math competition, Stanford math competition, and even world languages like Korean, Chinese, and Japanese. So if you're serious about preparation and want a tool that actually helps you level up for literally no cost at all, go check it out. It's in the link in the description, and there's literally no reason to check it out because, like I said, it's free. Finally, the reflection. Not the moral of the story, but the reason it stays with you. Now, this part might seem straightforward, but I would say hands down, the hardest to do well. A weak reflection will just sum up the story, right? In the end, I learned XYZ, right? Or this experience taught me why. But a real reflection doesn't tell the reader what to think. It helps them feel what you've come to understand. It doesn't give closure, it just gives depth and further information of what your perspective looks like. Reflection is where the story ripples outward. It's where we see not just what changed that moment, but how that shift continues to echo in the way that you move through the world today. You shouldn't have to tell me the impact that it has for the rest of your life. You shouldn't be saying that. You shouldn't be saying that, oh, I had this big change in me and this big realization. Now from this point on forward, I do XYZ different. You shouldn't be saying that. I should be able to feel that and really see how that ripples into your future. It's where you connect the dots between past, present, and future and do it without hitting the reader over the head, right? One of the techniques we use here is the mirror image, where your closing paragraph subtly calls back to the opening scene, but shows how your lens has changed. Maybe you return to the same setting, but this time you see it with new eyes. Maybe the same action happens, but your reaction is different. That's how you show growth without declaring it. Now, I'm gonna put up a quick little supplemental essay answer that did really, really well this past admission cycle. This is the same student that got into Caltech for physics. So if you can look at his paper, you could pause the screen right now and read through it, but you could see how he, at the very end, hints back to what he talked about with his favorite character within Steins Gate. Right? He says at the end, all that's left is a scrappy lab and a time machine. It hints back to the main character, his idol that he's talking about when he's answering the prompt. So if you want to pause that, read through it, it is one of the most successful essays that we've had so far. And you might think it's cringe, you might think it's a little weird, but it works. It works. You could actually read it through and see how our narrative architecture building really applies to that essay. Another reflection move we absolutely love is what we call the external extension, where you take the personal insight and map it onto a bigger idea. Not in a preachy way, but in a way that suggests you're starting to see your experience as part of something broader than yourself, a family dynamic, a social pattern, a truth about ambition, identity, or community, right? When done well, the reflection makes the reader pause, not because you said something profound, but because they see themselves in your clarity. That's what makes your essay memorable. So when you look at these three pieces, the hook, the turn, the reflection, they're not just parts of a story. They're the emotional architecture of your identity. And when you layer them right, when you move us from immersion to evolution to insight, you create something rare, not just a strong essay, but most importantly, and I know I repeat this every single time, but just a real one. Let me give you a quick real example. So we worked with a student who on paper had pretty much everything, right? Near perfect GPA within top 5 of their school, strong test scores, leadership roles, community service, the works, right? But her first essay draft, it just read like a LinkedIn profile wrapped in a pep talk. Now, there's nothing wrong with it, right? But nothing really stuck with us. Nothing really kind of pulled at my emotional strings. So we went back to her actual experiences, asked her what she felt most uncertain, most challenged, most aware of her own limitations. She told us about a summer job teaching swim lessons to non-English speaking kids. She wasn't qualified and she definitely wasn't fluent. So for the first few weeks, she felt like she was failing, and that became our anchor. We used that single moment, her realizing that she was relying more on hand gestures and emotions than words, to open the essay. From there, we followed her journey of learning to communicate across barriers, of discovering leadership wasn't about giving instructions, but creating safety. And that essay got her into Columbia, UCLA, and Northwestern. Now, I do want to say though, just because you have an exceptional essay doesn't mean it makes up for a crappy GPA or a crappy extracurricular list, right? That's not what I'm trying to say, okay? But when you're at that point where you're at a level ground of most applicants at a place like Harvard, Stanford, Caltech, there's really not much you could do on your application itself regarding GPA, SAT scores, extracurriculars to really differentiate yourself. At a certain point, it comes down to those essays, and that's where this narrative architecture building would really help with your essay writing process. And if you're a junior heading into senior year that wants that expert guidance when writing your college essays just like this summer is your window to get ahead. We've put together a bundle just for rising seniors, over $6,000 in strategy, essay support, and interview prep, totally free if you enroll by June 15th. Here's what's included. This is all on top of our core consulting program that's helped students get into Stanford, Yale, Columbia, MIT, and every single UC school. If you're serious, check the link in the description, and again, only if you enroll in our consulting program by June 15th. Now, here's the thing, right? Even the most compelling essays doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It has to fit in the larger narrative of your application. And for most students, that narrative starts outside the essay through the extracurriculars they choose to actually pursue. So if you haven't seen it yet, we made a full video breaking down the 6 strategic extracurriculars that not only look great on paper, but help you build the kind of authentic, story-driven profile that top schools are actually drawn to. It's called Do These 6 Extracurriculars and Thank Me Later, which you can watch right here. And if you're wondering, okay, but what do I even write my essay about? That video is where you start. So if this video helped you, hit like, drop a comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. But more than that, I want you to take this seriously, right? Because narrative architecture isn't just how you write an essay. Wishing you luck, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.